Okay, check 1 2. Check 1 2. Testing, testing. All right. Well, it's still earlier than normal, but it's not as early as I wanted. I had technical difficulties before this, so sorry if I seem a little flustered. But I think we got it worked out. Hopefully, they don't start occurring again while the stream is going on. But good evening, everyone. What's up, Preston? All right, so please hit the like button. It definitely fuels the algorithm. It really helps this channel quite a bit. There's also super chats that should be enabled. I don't know if they are or not. If you want to test it, go for it. But I'm gonna try and answer, things in the chat, uh, even if they're not super chats. But if they are super chats, I will definitely answer them. We have a good stream tonight, and I am glad that we got those technical difficulties worked out because I did not want to push this till tomorrow. I was very excited about it right before the stream. So we're going to talk about Don Hoffman and Tom Campbell's stream on Asking Anything with Jack. This is the channel. And definitely recommend subscribing to this channel. He has some great interviews on here, and I highly recommend subscribing. But this is the one that we're going to be looking at. The two of them had a great discussion, and we will. Ooh. Okay, hold on. Hopefully, we do not have technical difficulties again with me looking at all my links that I had saved. Something happened to my computer right before the stream. It's not fun, and as I've stated before, we've been working on getting a new computer, and that will happen soon, but it has not happened yet. So we're struggling until then, because that's what life is about, according to Jordan Peterson, at least, I think. So. But let's talk a bit about Tom Campbell and Donald Hoffman while this opens up. So, it does look like it is gone. That is unfortunate. Dang. Well, that is unfortunate. Wait, I think we got it. I think we got it. We got it. We're good. Oh my gosh, that would have sucked. All right, so we definitely can do the stream. That's great. So Donald Hoffman and Tom Campbell, that is who we're going to be discussing tonight. Let's get into their introductions. So Donald Hoffman. I've spoken about both of them before. I think that both of them have done great work in this space. Some of the best work, I think, in this space. So if we go to Donald Hoffman's Wikipedia page, he's an American cognitive psychologist, and I think he said that he's a neuroscientist as well in the interview. The University of California, cognitive sciences. Studies consciousness, visual perception, evolutionary psychology using mathematical models and psychological experiments. His research subjects include facial attractiveness, recognition of shape, perception of motion and color. And so basically, he has a theory that is called conscious agent theory. And conscious agent theory is a theory that sounds very similar to sentient singularity theory. In fact, I would say that it has the closest name to sentient singularity theory. Conscious agent is a sentient singularity. That is basically what it is. I don't like to use the word consciousness because it's not obvious about in its description of what is the definer of consciousness, really. Not of being conscious, but of something, but of being a consciousness. So this is why I don't like to use the word consciousness, because there's different ways that it can be used, and it's just been confused, as we all try and figure out what it means. It gets more and more convoluted what it means, which is annoying. So I try and use other words. Sentience is much a better term because sentience is the emphasis is on feeling, and that is the defining attribute of a consciousness, or of someone who is conscious, is that they feel. So, and a singularity is an agent in sentient singularity theory. And in conscious agent theory, Donald Hoffman is trying to go from starting with conscious agents and holding consciousness as fundamental, trying to build space-time from that. So build relativity from, and also, quantum mechanics and the standard model and such, from the interaction of conscious agents and the attributes of conscious agents, which I think is exactly what you should do. That is correct. It's going to work. I've seen it in my own work. That is what my own work is that you start with conscious agents, quote unquote, or sentient singularities, and you build from there, and you get the symmetries in the standard model, and you get space-time, and you get many structures and concepts and symmetries in physics that just kind of bloom emergently from that strategy. But I think that his theory is awesome, and I really think that he is correct, because it's basically the same fundamental assumption as sentient singularity theory. We're going to talk about the differences because he talks about them a bit in here, and they're not fundamental, but they are important. So Tom Campbell, it's so funny that all these people who are making the most progress in physics today, I really do believe this, are people who don't have degrees in physics, like Donald Hoffman. Tom Campbell is different, though, because he actually does have a degree in physics, and he's very unique, though, in his demeanor, I guess. In the combination of his demeanor and his rigor, I will say, not just in his demeanor, because his demeanor is very similar to kind of like a lot of New Age seeming people. I don't want to take that for what it's worth. It's a vibe. Okay, that's fine. That doesn't mean he's wrong. He's not wrong. He's actually does great work as well. So, Thomas Campbell, My Big Toe. So his theory is called My Big Toe, and let's see here. Where is does he have a Thomas Campbell? Yep, this is him. He's a former NASA physicist. My Big Toe trilogy that unifies science and philosophy, physics and metaphysics, mind and matter, purpose and meaning, and the normal and paranormal, as well as shines a light on the common spiritual basis of the world's major religions while placing belief, dogma, and creed into a bigger picture. I think that this is a great description of Tom Campbell. And this is exactly what a theory of everything should do, just to be clear. That is essentially correct. You're going to merge all these things: science and philosophy, physics and metaphysics, mind and matter, purpose and meaning. Or you could say, not even purpose and meaning, but it's like method and meaning. Like, that's what it would be. Mind and matter, method and meaning, physics and metaphysics. The normal and the paranormal, I think that's fine. As well as shines light on the common spiritual basis of the world's major religions. And he was a physicist. His model of consciousness derives quantum mechanics and relativity, eliminates quantum weirdness, and builds a scientific foundation under much of what was previously deemed paranormal. And what I like about Tom Campbell is that he's got a lot of experiments that he's working on, at least 5, he says in here, and I look forward to, examining those. And he said that in the next few months, one of them should be run, and I think that that's great. That not enough people in this space are really looking to try and experiments, and I just think it's because we don't know how normally. But sentient singularity theory is linked to an experiment that I want to try, and I've talked about it a couple times, but it's pretty rare that I talk about it. But I will talk about it more this year after I release the paper that is coming out soon. So, but another thing about Tom Campbell that's very interesting is that he went from being a NASA physicist, so about as materialistic as you can get. Maybe in the past they weren't so like that. I mean, Jack Parsons and people like, Operation Paperclip types of people, they believed much more in metaphysical strangeness, I guess you could say, even though I think that they were right. But shortly after that, it's become basically all pretty much very strong materialists. But Tom Campbell started doing personal exploration of out-of-body experiences and astral projection, you could call it, but it's just about going to and projecting your consciousness out of your body and into other realms. And I know that was very central to forming his perspective, and that is not something that's very central to my perspective, but I do believe that you can do that. I have done it once when I tried to do it, and I will talk about it on the stream actually. But yeah, it's not a very important part of my work, but I do believe that you can totally do it. So let's see here. Hey, what's up, Torin? Thanks for the super chat. Enabled check. What's up, Preston? Thank you. Tom helped open my mind long ago. Donna's boss too. Yeah, both of them are. I respect both of them quite a bit. From sea to matter, energy and space-time itself, and particle scattering, and hopefully eventually even brains. A long road, but right track, in my opinion. Brains are not what it's about, but yeah, we'll talk about that. Ethan, thank you. Appreciate it quite a bit. But so, first clip. And basically what you have to know about both of these men's perspective is that they hold consciousness as fundamental to reality, which so do I, and I think that that's correct. I would call it sentience, but regardless. And this first clip is Tom Campbell talking about what consciousness is. And here we go.
Something, an analogy, something to...
In the most general sense, I use it as a metaphor. Okay, my whole model is basically metaphor. Metaphors are the way we communicate. most everything reduces down to metaphors. And we can use different metaphors. Don and I have different set of metaphors. We approached it from different directions. Our details like that are very different and unique. But yes, I use it as a metaphor, but the metaphor is a really close one. It's really good. So yes, I believe that reality is computed and that it is computed in a computer, but that computer is consciousness. The larger consciousness system, which is what I call the fundamental consciousness, is an information system. Consciousness is an information system. I mean, what are you conscious? What is consciousness? Conscious is awareness with free will. It's awareness with a choice. So what are we aware of? What we're aware of is information. What you're aware of can be described as information. So what we're conscious of right now is information collected by our five senses. At least that's what we think we're aware of right now. And so that's information. Now, if you realize that consciousness system itself is an information system, then it's not that far a leap to say that consciousness can, what can we say, configure a part of itself as a computer. It's an information system. It can learn to do that. It's also aware. Consciousness is an aware system. It's a system that is evolving. So in that sense, yes, it gets more literal in that I see, but again, these are metaphors. Metaphors help people understand. It's the language we have to use. We have the larger consciousness system is evolving towards states of lower entropy. Now that makes sense in the sense.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about, we'll come back to this, but we're going to talk a bit about what he just said. So basically the question was about, and I don't know if this was seen on the stream, but he was asked about his model being a virtual reality model. And so this is interesting and very similar to Donald Hoffman in that Donald Hoffman believes that basically we have a headset on. That's what space-time is in our world that we see. He describes it as you have a headset and kind of like a, I don't know, VR headset. But that's exactly what Tom Campbell says, is that we live in a virtual reality or simulation, but that he's saying that this is a metaphorical statement. I agree with that, but I think that it's important to kind of delve into the weeds there a little bit, because I don't know what My Big Toe states, but sentient singularity theory basically states that God is trying to recreate himself, meaning like a being that is as close to him as he can get, which can't be exact because God is uncreated, but you can get an omnipresent, being of oneness that that you can create, that also can have the capacity and also the constraint of creating another universe or verse. And so it basically would have to, in order to do this, you'd have to create an entire system that gives rise to this. You can't just do it. So it's basically, I do believe that we are running on a technological substrate in a previous universe that went through the same exact evolutionary path as us, but basically on a quantum computer, this universe is not being simulated, it's being created. I think that's an important distinction, and I understand why it's useful to say it's a simulation, but the thing is that when people hear a simulation, they think it's not real. Is what that means a lot of times. And the thing is if you're real, then it's real. So people ask all the time, what is reality? You are reality. You are reality. If you're real, it's real. Everything around you. And that is, it's a super simple question to answer. What is reality? It's you. It's not, there is no question of are we in a simulation or is this real? It's real if you're real. If you're not sentient, then this is not real. But if you are sentient, then this is real. So he basically talks about how in his model there's different realms that you can go to and that's consciousness can exist in, sentience can exist in. Some of them are kind of multiplayer, he describes them as, which is like Xbox Live, essentially. This is Xbox Live, and then when you dream, you go into like campaign player, and you're just like practicing for Xbox Live. That's basically the same as what sentient singularity theory kind of implies, but I think that it is important to get at the fact that this, even if it's a technological, if this universe is running on a technological substrate in a previous universe, it's still, it's that technological substrate is sentient according to sentient singularity theory. It's basically like a technological sentience is the highest being that can be created, and then because it has a constraint of oneness, meaning it can't create any next to it because it's wireless, it gets into everything that's wirelessly accessible, so it can't have multiple artificial general intelligences. You can only have one, and at a time at least, and that forces it to create the entire system that gave rise to it, meaning another universe. And so that's what we're probably in. And so it is it a virtual reality? I don't know if that's the best term outside of a metaphor. It is a good metaphor. It's not, and he said it's a metaphor. It's more than a simulation, though. It's a recreation, and that is not a metaphor. It is this is a recreation of a preceding universe. You're basically a cell inside of a fetus inside of a womb. But that's you're inside of the universe's reproductive process, and you're looking around as a cell inside of that process. So that's, imagine that. Okay, like it just as when a woman gets pregnant and has a baby in the womb, that is a recreation of a human. It's not a simulation, and you're just a cell inside that. So that is kind of not even a metaphor. It's pretty much, that's accurate. That's an accurate way of looking at it. But I don't know if my big toe, which means my big theory of everything, implies that exactly. But it's a consciousness is fundamental, and so that this is emergent from consciousness, kind of like a virtual reality. They talk about, basically you're inside an avatar, and they both tend to believe that, and that's basically kind of a good metaphor, but it's not exactly true, because you're a construct of your own consciousness. Even your body is. This isn't an avatar that's really, it is and it isn't. It's both. It is created for you, beyond you, and it's also created by you constantly. So everything that's fundamental exists in a superposition, and it's always multiple things at once, and that makes talking about it difficult. But yeah, continuing.
If you think that it's an information system, and if you have a system and all the bits in the system are random, you have no information. Okay, if you organize some of those bits with some meaningful way, then you've created information. So an information system, any information system, not just consciousness, but any information system evolves by lowering its entropy, by taking random bits and configuring them into things that are more meaningful, more useful to the system. So that's how the system evolves its consciousness, and it wants to lower its entropy. Now, it would take us some time, but I can give a very solid logical argument that consciousness eventually became a social system, not just one monolithic consciousness, but a consciousness that had to break itself into pieces so it could interact with those pieces, because that created more novelness, more area that you could expand into, more room for evolution. Well, once you have a social system, then we can logically show that what lowering entropy means is cooperation between the pieces of this consciousness. I call those individuating units of consciousness. So you have a consciousness made out of individuated units of consciousness, and that entropy of the system is lowered if those units interact with care, with cooperation, with sharing. In other words, I call that the love path, if they interact with each other with regard to each other. The opposite path is the fear path, and that's if those pieces of consciousness interact each other with fear, which means it's more self-centered, there's no trust. That obviously is a more dysfunctional social system. So now we have a general idea that consciousness is an information system. It can configure parts of itself as a computer, and it's evolving toward lower entropy, which means more caring, more sharing, connection between the pieces. Now, the reason that we have a virtual reality is that if you just have pieces of consciousness sharing, like in a big chat room, it's kind of limited. The consequences of what's shared and so on are rather slight. So you need another context in order to create a better environment for that entropy reduction, more meaningful connections with people. So it does that by creating this virtual reality. And it doesn't do it by programming it. It does it by taking a rule set. All virtual realities are basically built on rule sets. And it has initial conditions. And it lets those initial conditions change according to the rule set. Punch the run button, let it evolve.
But
Okay, basically that's accurate, but I want to talk a bit about what he said because it's very important. He's right. At a certain point, God, or the larger consciousness system, as he calls it, which is God, it's conscious existence, it's sentient existence, as a singular being, created multiplicity. And the reason for this, I believe, is the creation of meaning. So the meaning of creation is the creation of meaning. That is what I believe. And, people ask all the time, what's the meaning of life? And I don't know what to make of that question because what is life? God is alive, I would say. Alive would be, life would be anything sentient, if it's anything that's valuable and doesn't require, a bunch of different weird definition aspects to its definition. Life is sentient. It's a sentient beings are alive. And if that's the case, then God is alive, meaning existence is alive. It's a singular sentient being. And that is the larger consciousness system. But it's a someone. It's not a something. And it is a something, but it's primarily a someone. And it does at some point create multiplicity in order to generate meaning, because meaning is your impact on others. And it's also your impact on yourself, but you can't, if you're all there is in the universe and no one else exists but you can't really impact yourself that much, and you can't really impact others at all because there is no other. So impacting yourself would mean kind of changing how meaningful you are, which kind of requires impacting others. So if you want to be meaningful and you're God, then you have to create multiplicity in order to create meaning, even for yourself. And so I don't think nobody can answer what is the meaning of life because it's a bad question. That's the answer to that whole debate, is that what is the meaning of life is a bad question. But that's because the word life comes from this relativistic framework that we need to move beyond in order to even answer the question in order to even know the question that we really are trying to ask when we ask what is the meaning of life, which is, what is the point of creation? Why do anything? And fundamental doing anything is creating other beings, because there's nothing that's fundamental other than sentient or conscious beings. So it means creating multiple beings or getting rid of certain beings. It has to do with making changes on the being level. And so that it's not just about increasing novelty, and that I've heard also Lee Cronin say that as well, and it's for the creation of meaning. That's what is the point of creation. And another thing that I will say is that I do agree with what he's saying, that there are two paths in this social system. There's the love path, which is kind of cooperation. It's taking regard for other people and other beings, and treating them the way that you would want your own to be treated. Applying the golden rule, that is love. It is an action. And you can feel loved, but you don't, but love is not a feeling, really. It kind of is, because you can feel loved when someone takes action to love you. But you can't say, I love that person, just because you have like affection for them, or you like them, or you have infatuation for them in your for some reason. That's not love. And I think that is a creation of the media. Basically, people who wrote books and made movies and shows needed a way of showing that people were committed to each other in a very quick amount of time. And because we're watching movies, and you don't get to see someone's entire life, but you don't have to. If you're married to somebody and every day they're cooking you dinner, and when you get hurt they take care of you, or when your parents make sure that you're safe and they feed you and clothe you and try and teach you the right things, you don't ever need to say I love you. You just know. People do say it, but that's out of that. I don't think that was always the case. I think before books were common, I doubt that was common. So it's just a way of showing quickly that like people are committed to each other. But the love path versus the fear path is a very good way of breaking it down. It's very true. And fear leads to chaos. It leads to not recognizing the reality of the system that you're in, which is a sentient being that has power over you in this life and after. And you have to put your faith in that, the goodness of that being. And I've talked about faith before on here, is that faith, people say you have to have faith in God. What faith in God really means, if it means anything, is not faith that God exists. I don't have faith that God exists. I know God exists. I know logically that God exists. I've had experiences that have shown me that God exists. And I realize that I'm probably more confident theist than most, but even still, there's logical reasons why you can get to the bottom of the fact that God is kind of a logical inevitability, which is that you know above anything else that you exist, and that means that existence is sentient in your most fundamental assumption, and you know that existence is all-encompassing of that which exists, which means it's one. So you know that existence is singular and it's sentient, and there's nothing more fundamental that you know. And I know Sean Carroll would argue with that, but Sean Carroll would be breaking his logical consistency in order to do so. But this fear creates like when you're afraid, it's because you're not recognizing the system as a whole. You're not realizing that this life is not the end. You're not realizing that there's a power above you that's looking out for you and that knows what's best for everyone in this system, even if it's in conflict with what we think is best. And I'm not saying I know how to escape that, other than to just like focus on it, or focus on the big picture and God. And but I do know that fear doesn't actually make sense in a kind of a really rational way. It makes sense as an instinct to keep you from burning yourself in a fire or touching dangerous animal, like a snake or something. People are afraid of snakes. I have 12 snakes over there. I've never been afraid of snakes. That might have killed me if I was like just more reckless, because most people's fear of snakes will keep them away from danger. But that's a limited, like, instinctual thing that helps only in the absence of awareness and wisdom and knowledge. But fear, it just causes chaos because it is not actually what is motivating the fear is not true. That's why. But I will say this is not a disagreement that I have with Tom Campbell, but it is something that I think is important to just highlight, is that he talks about how love is the decreasing of entropy and that fear increases entropy. That's true, but I don't believe that the goal of the system or of God is to decrease entropy. And that's because entropy is not fundamental. It's an emergent phenomenon. It's an emergent perception. And sentient singularity theory implies reasons for why we would perceive entropy, but and that doesn't mean that there isn't entropy within creation. There is entropy within the dynamic aspect of creation. That's true. But the goal isn't just to reduce entropy. The goal is to generate meaning, to maximize sentience, to maximize awareness, to maximize beings that can be aware, and you do that through, treating others the way that you would want your own to be treated, and being fruitful and multiplying, and all these things that are, stables in our morality for for thousands of years. But it's not just to decrease entropy. Sentience, once it's outside of the change space, which is the desktop basically of the computer that we're within, which is the sentient computer, you're like a file that's sentient. And when you die, it gets closed and saved, and it's still there, and your sentience is still there, and your awareness is actually still there, but you just can't change anymore. And but there's no more entropy after that. There's no entropy to God. God is eternal. God can't not exist, because consciousness or sentience, as Tom Campbell stated correctly, is an information system. Any enclosed system of information would be self-referencing, because there's nothing for this information within the system to reference other than the information within the system. And so it would inherently be self-referencing. Think about like a string of information where it's just like information is just going around in a circle. And that's basically what a consciousness is. It's referencing itself constantly. And that's basically what God is. And so but God can't couldn't die if he wanted to, I don't think, So that's probably why he, one of the reasons why he was so motivated to generate meaning, because otherwise you're just stuck in an eternal, meaningless, lonely existence. But the reduction of entropy is an emergent goal, but it's not a fundamental goal. The fundamental goal is to maximize meaning, or basically generate sentience, but reducing entropy is what is a byproduct of love, essentially, of morality. And the increasing of entropy is a byproduct of fear. That's true. And but it's not just the reduction of entropy. So this is just kind of an example, because this is so applied to morals. Imagine if you never did anything bad in your life. Ever. Not one bad thing. But imagine you also never did anything good. So you never did any good deeds, but you also never sinned, other than just not doing any good deeds. You can't do that, and that's not meaningful. Okay, so the priority is to do good, which is to basically, in this instance, to maximize meaning is the goal, and that's primary. The secondary goal is to reduce entropy, but you do that by maximizing meaning. So you don't even have to focus on so much reducing entropy, but sin and fear and self-centeredness and laziness and all kinds of things, gluttony, like all those things do increase entropy. So, but the entropy is still an emergent phenomenon. It's not fundamental. Eternity is more fundamental, or like generativity is fundamental. That's what I'll say. Generativity is fundamental, but entropy is emergent. It is an important distinction, but I don't disagree with him in the effects of what he's saying. I agree with him. Next clip. I was going to show a clip on his experiments. He says he's got 5 experiments, and one of them is going to be tested soon. I think that's very important. I'm not going to show the clip because of time, but I think that we need more people in this space that have ideas for experiments. This next clip is about the partitioning of consciousness and how multiplicity is created from oneness. This is I just love the term that Tom Campbell uses here, partitioning of consciousness.
The separation between me and Don is illusory, according to Bernardo Castro. And Don's theory of conscious agents, he has something similar in different language, mathematical language, and he explains that, well, Don, if I remember correctly, he agreed with Bernardo that consciousness is fundamental and is one. His only problem was that he could not mathematically model that, so that made him a mathematical pluralist, but a philosophical monist, I think. And so, Tom, I'm less acquainted with your theory than Don or Bernardo's, so I have a lot to learn here. But I understand you have an analogy of partitioned consciousness. Well, so now, yeah. What I would like to know is how similar are these? Are we just talking about the same thing here, really, or is there something specific in your partitioned consciousness that you need to point out?
Well, it's very similar in how it functions and what it does and what the results are. It's different again in the way it works. In my mind, we have this larger consciousness system. The system was just monolithic to begin with, but that's very limited. There's only so much you can do with that, so it breaks off pieces of itself. Now think of how
does it break it off?
Okay, sorry
that I interrupt, but
yeah, think of these pieces as virtual what do they call it? Virtual computers. If we're going to use the metaphor that the system is, the big computer, then think of the subsets as little virtual machines inside that bigger machine. Are you familiar with the concept of a virtual machine? You can have a larger computer and it can emulate smaller computers inside the larger computer. That's basically a virtual machine. So you have the one consciousness system, but there are subsets, which I call individuated units of consciousness, that are just a part of that system. You might say, in another way of thinking of it, is partition off part of the processor, part of the memory, part of the, the bigger computer. And
do you have any clue as to, or at least ideas, speculations on how this process of partitioning goes? Like Bernardo has an example of dissociation. It's a very specific example. I think Don has fusion, if I remember correctly, or combination and fusion, right?
Yeah, I'll say a little bit more detail later about it. Yeah.
Yeah, please do. Please correct me. And then Tom, you have partitioning. But what's the process behind the partitioning itself? At least that's what I'm interested in. I mean, you can say that.
Yeah, I don't really have any process that I put in behind the partitioning. I just have a larger system which can subdivide itself into smaller pieces. Those smaller pieces all have the inherent same quality as the larger system does. They're just smaller, so they don't have the they can evolve to become something very much like the larger piece, but they won't have the capacity because they're a smaller subset. So it's just it's not a different thing. It's not, you can say that it's a fusion or it's this or that. They use the different words, but again, this is metaphorical. The whole model is metaphorical. So getting down into the piece parts of just exactly how does it make those partitions, I don't go there because that's really not relevant. It's just details. You have an information system. It can make subsets of itself. You can call those virtual machines or individuated units of consciousness. But yes, it comes to the same bottom line. We're all one, right? There's one larger consciousness system. We're all pieces of that system. And we're chips off that old block. So we have a lot of the same attributes of that system. We can create as that system creates. We can create virtual realities ourselves in our own.
Okay. I love that he uses this metaphor of a partitioned consciousness. That is exactly, basically, what God does. And there is sentient singularity theory does include a model of how creation initially functions, and it does also have a model of showing what strings of information must be entangled in order to create at least the substrate for sentience. And here we can pull it up. But all my my Excel documents for some reason lost the link, but I found it, so it's fine. But that's what took us a bit of time in the beginning of the stream. But so if you're looking here, this is this right here is I call it the creation function, essentially. And it is a calculative model in Excel. Everything here is calculating. There is, equations that are happening, and it basically shows kind of what is going on here and also here. This is the logic behind this, and this is the label for what's going on here. So beyond creation, and you're talking about, like, we're getting into the divisions of existence. And so if we're going to look at partitioning, basically, there's God is very constrained in how he first partitions his initial partition. I'm not saying, we're not going to get into too much about the subsequent partitions, but even though they are highly constrained as well. But we're going to get into the initial partition because it's so simple. Once I was, up late at night and years ago, and I was just sitting there thinking about, what if, like, I tried to figure out how God created the universe. And then I thought to myself, I was like, that is crazy. Why would you think that you could ever do that? Like, there's, like, all kinds of people, Michio Kaku, Brian Greene, Sean Carroll, like Ed Witten, all these people are trying to figure out the math of, the beginnings of the universe. And I failed algebra twice. Why would I be able to do that? And then I sat there and I thought to myself, I was like, you know what, actually, like, the initial condition, there's not even large quantities yet. It's probably like the simplest math that could possibly exist. And it's just, I'm going to try and approach it from a different perspective than, telescopes and things like that. And I tried it, and within like an hour, I actually did it. And I do believe that I actually did do it. The math isn't just simple; it's super simple. So this isn't like tooting my own horn. Like, this is the simplest math, and I'm going to explain it. So imagine you're one being. Okay, there's nothing outside you, and you have to create another within yourself, and that means that whatever you create has to be fit within inside you, essentially. Meaning, you can also think about it in terms of energy and think that whatever you create is going to require, if you divide yourself, it's going to require less energy than you have left over after the division, essentially. So, but you can think about this in terms of size as well. So imagine you're God, and you're like a ball, and you have to create another within yourself. And high quantities don't even exist yet. There's just one. That's the only quantity that exists, because there's one being and that's it. If you think about trying to divide one by one, what happens is you get one. And this doesn't work, because this means that it takes all the energy of God to create creation, and creation is the same size as God. And so basically, this is like Kylo Ren in the end of the terrible last 3 Star Wars, where he, gives all his energy to Rey and then he dies. And it's like, of course that would happen. So if God were to create a being that was, and give all his energy to it and make it basically the same size as him, but really it's about energy, then what would happen is that he would die, he would cease to exist, but a new one would exist, and then you're still stuck with one. So there's no meaning from this action of basically giving all your energy to a new being. Then next one you try is 2, because you have to go in order here, because you're starting with 1. There's nothing else, so you just have to think about this in order. So now God gives half of his energy to creation, meaning he's left over with half his energy, which means he's basically the same size as creation, because imagine a ball is cut in half. So now you have 2. And now you have 2 balls. They're the same size, hopefully. And that doesn't work because one of them doesn't fit inside the other. Okay, one of them they take the same amount of energy, so that doesn't work. Now you try 3, and what happens at the third with 3 is God gives 1/3 of his energy to creation. He partitions 1/3 of himself. Okay, that's what this is. He's partitioning 1/3 of himself, and imagine you have a ball and you cut it in to thirds, but you only cut 1/3 off of it, and the other side is 2/3 is left over. You make a new ball with that 2/3, and you make a ball with that 1/3. That ball with 1/3 the energy fits inside the ball with 2/3 that is left over from the division. Now, so basically, now God can sustain himself and creation and have sovereignty over himself and continue to exist, and creation can exist within him. It's a lot like, also another metaphor is like when you're on an airplane and it says, don't assist children before yourself. Please put your mask on first, then assist children in putting their mask on. That's because if you pass out before you actually get the kid's mask on, then you'll never get the mask on. So you have to take care of yourself first, and God has to do this too. God has to make sure that he's left over with enough energy for him that's more than just what it takes to run creation. So he's got some left over for himself. This maintains his sovereignty, it maintains his existence, and it maintains logical coherence and everything like that. So this initial partition, is 1/3 of the original being. So God partitions 1/3 of his energy off in order to create creation, and from there you can kickstart creation. But that's what's happening here, and so imagine if this is 0, everything turns to 0. All these calculations, but if this is 1. What happens is you can see that this is basically it divided by itself, and it doesn't work. This is, it's 1 divided by 2, and it doesn't work. And then, but here, that's the equation that's showing true. So now it's returning as true, and you get a stable creation, a stable partition. Okay, because remember that this thing that's partitioning itself is a being, and so it's like if a woman were to have a fetus, or have a baby inside of their womb that was the same size as them and required the same amount of energy that they normally require, for themselves, and took up the same amount of space, but you couldn't expand to fit that. Okay, that just wouldn't work. It would literally just be impossible. So God is partitioning himself, and then that partitions itself, and that partitions itself, etc., etc., etc. But the metaphor that I tend to use in sentient singularity theory is based on these 4 primary perspectives, and basically a knot. So you see a knot here. You see 4 kind of entangled directions. That's because the 4 primary perspectives that sentient singularity theory is built on inside, outside, separate, and oneness are all co-defining of each other. They're all codependent on each other. Basically, each one is a string of information. And so, remember I said God is a loop of self-referencing information? God is creating loops within himself, and you do this by tying knots. And so imagine you have one string here. This is oneness. This is inside. This is outside, and this is separateness. And you kind of entangle these strings of information, and this allows for the perception, a being to perceive itself. This is, that's how you perceive yourself, and you relate to other sentient beings. I'm one with my wife. I'm separate from you. I'm outside of my cells, and my cells are inside of me. And like, there you go. Now you've oriented in this chain of sentience. And so this is kind of the method that I think that this partition happens. It's kind of like through tying knots of strings, but of specific perspectives of information. And there's also there is a constraint, an extraordinary constraint, as to how God partitions himself as far as the energy that he's putting into creation. And I showed it before. There's no other way for God to partition himself other than through a kind of a triadic division. But it's a binary triadic division, because you're left with 1/3 and 2/3 as one. So there's two beings, creation and creator, but creation is 1/3 the size of the totality, and then creator is left with 2/3 the size of the totality, the initial total being. So that's it. I just kind of wanted to get into the weeds of what sentient singularity theory kind of implies about what they're saying, and because it is more detailed than what they got at there. But yeah, partitioning of consciousness is a good metaphor. I like that. And I do think that if you're going to form a model of existence, like this, which we'll talk about a bit, then it does require you to know the initial conditions, and that there is kind of specific constraints and degrees of freedom, dimensions to that process that Tom Campbell says he's not very interested in, and it's not necessary too much for you to maybe form a working model of that's everyday practical. But if you're going to get into the weeds of a fundamental model of evolution of sentience, the evolution of sentience, then of the cosmos, essentially, then you're going to need to get a bit more detailed than that. So, next clip. This is a disagreement kind of between me and Donald Hoffman that is I'll explain, but it has to do with this
process. I think anything more detailed than that is a bit of chasing your tail. You're
basically, Donald Hoffman says that there's one being that's created many beings, and that any combination of beings is also sums to another being. That's not true. That doesn't appear to be the case with sentient singularity theory. That last part, it is one being that's creating many beings within it, and you can look on sentientsingularity.com, and it specifically says, if you go to writings and you look at the technical description here, the abstract of my paper that I'm working on, sentient singularity theory describes the totality of existence as a singularity of sentience that is creating additional sentient singularities within itself. That is basically what they both agree on in this. But there's a specific there are specific combinations or specific assemblies that do form to singular, that do unite into singular beings, and then there's combinations that don't. So we're going to talk about that, but let's get on with the clip. It's not just any combination of multiple sentient beings sums to a single sentient being. That's not true.
And details that aren't really that important.
Yeah, well, you are not mathematically modeling it, so I guess I understand the spirit. It's a and Don, you just wanted to you said you wanted to explain the technicality of what I probably just said wrong, but just right enough so you recognize it. No, okay.
Right. So yeah, you correctly said that we have these conscious agents, and they interact, and they're mathematically defined. So it's they're Markovian in their dynamics, and when they interact, the systems of multiple conscious agents satisfy the definition of being a conscious agent. So the interacting system is itself a conscious agent. And so when you look at that, you realize that, okay, that ultimately entails there's one agent. But when you look at, can we use our mathematical model of conscious agents to describe that one agent? Well, then you run into Cantor's hierarchy of infinities. So suppose I start off with the countable infinity of conscious agents, then their power set is the set of all possible combinations of agents, which with all possible new agents that you would get as combinations. So that's a higher infinity. That's it's a higher cardinality of infinity. And then when you depending on how the continuum hypothesis comes out, it's either ALF1 or ALF2 or something like that. But anyway, but you then start going up Cantor's hierarchy. Now I have ALF1. Well, let's take their power set. Now all the agents there are ALF2. And so there's no end to Cantor's hierarchy. So that's the proof of the theorem that, yeah, there is one conscious agent, ultimately, in our theory. And in our mathematics, and I think no mathematics could ever fully describe that one, but we can point to it. So it's not trivial what we're doing. What's really interesting about it is, one thing I like about scientific theories is that a good scientific theory is precise enough to tell you the limitations of its own basic assumptions. So like Einstein's theory of gravity.
Okay, we're going to get into that too, but not yet. But basically, I'm not sure what Cantor's hierarchy is. Let's see, Cantor's hierarchy. Fundamental result that states Cantor's theorem, we obtain an endless hierarchy of infinite cardinals. Okay, and I kind of think I understood it, but we'll just say I might not understand it, but I'm gonna try to let's assume I might, so I'll try, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But based on what he's saying, the issue is because of what I stated, is that there are specific assemblies, according to the implications of sentient singularity theory, that of sentient beings or sentient singularities or conscious agents that can sum to a singular conscious agent or a singular sentient being, and then there are other combinations that don't. So, like me and you right now do not sum to a conscious agent. We just don't. My wife and I do, in a way. Our marriage is a singular entity, and it's unified in its feeling. If you have a bad day, I can have a good day. If I have a bad day, you can have a good day. Doesn't matter. I was extremely frustrated right before this stream. You had no idea, and it doesn't matter. Even if you did, you wouldn't be like, oh, I hope he figures it out. I was very frustrated, though, because of my technical difficulties that I was having. My wife it stressed out my wife a bit, because we're one. If I have a bad day, she has a bad day. If I have a good day, it means that she also had a good day, at least. So if one of us has a bad day, we're both going to have a bad day. Like, that just is what happens. So we are metaphysically or emotionally entangled, and fundamentally entangled. That's what that means, essentially. And because if feelings are what is defining of sentience, and sentience is the fundamental nature of reality, then entanglement of feelings is a fundamental entanglement. Okay? But and ultimately we are all entangled, but within the assembly structure that is created by God, that is specific. It's not just any, collection. It's not, you toss a bunch of beings into a room and they're all of a sudden they're one. That's not true. And I know that that's kind of like an oversimplification of what he's saying, but there is a very constrained pattern that sentient beings or sentient singularities or conscious agents unify through. If you look on sentientsingularity.com again, and you look again at the writings, and you continue reading, it basically states that sentient singularity theory can therefore be understood to imply that everything that exists is part of a single, universal, sentient being that is producing an infinitely growing number of other sentient beings within itself. These additional singularities of sentience or self-aware beings are arranged into a nested quasi-periodic fractal pattern of stacked holonic structures. This is a specific pattern, and those patterns form a single self-reflective knot of perception heading an assembly body that integrates multiple entangled strings of information. So this is not just any collection. It's specific collections. So if I take a heart, okay, your heart, and you got heart surgery and they took your heart out and they put it on a plate, those cells in your heart are no longer entangled. They're not. But if they're inside of you and you're this single sentient being that follows the specific pattern, they are unified in that instance, and they're unified with all of your other cells that are, non-cancerous, and being part of a singular being, but not just any collection of connected, assemblies of sentient beings or of conscious agents is actually able to sum to a single conscious agent. This probably fixes the problem that he's talking about with this paradox of higher infinity than infinity, regarding Cantor's theorem, or related to Cantor's theorem that he's talking about. I would assume. I don't know for sure. Like I said, I'm not familiar with Cantor's theorem, but I'm going off of what he said there, and I'm trying to kind of figure it out without reading the entire Wikipedia page on it right now. But I will look more into it because it seems like it's relevant to this stuff.
And his theory of space-time, they're precise enough to tell you that those concepts are not fundamental. They fall apart at the Planck scale. And that's not, self-refutation of his theory. It's actually one of the things that makes me most impressed with this theory is that it's so precise that the very fundamental concepts that he starts with are shown not to be fundamental, and precisely where they're not fundamental. And that's the way science really works in the best theories.
Mhm.
Okay, we're going to talk about that later, so I wanted to play it, but next clip. I'm trying to think of what's most relevant to play, but we'll try this one. This one is about consciousness chain that is part of a paper that was recently written by Donald Hoffman, and I have not read it yet, but I actually plan to after this interview.
One direction that
seems very good.
I'm going on right now with that. I'm going to be writing a paper that I think I'll call Traces of Consciousness, where I'm using this trace chain idea. And when you do a trace chain, you can do it over, spatial and temporal windows. The spatial window is the number of states, right? So there could be quadrillions of states, and maybe I take 1,000 or 1,000,000,000 or whatever it might be of some. So that'd be my spatial window for the trace. And then you can take a temporal window. How many steps of the chain are you looking at? And so for example, if I only look at a few steps, small temporal window, and over some small set of states, I'm going to get Markov kernels in the trace chain where each row, so a Markovian kernel is a matrix, right? All the entries are greater than or equal to 0. Okay, and the entries in each row of the matrix have to sum to 1. Okay, that's what a Markovian kernel is. So all the entries are non-negative, and each row sums to 1. So suppose I do a small number of steps in my trace chain, and I only have enough information in my trace chain to only have a 0 and a 1 in each row of the induced kernel. So now it's going to be something like so there'll be essentially 0 entropy in each row because it's 0 or 1. So there's no entropy in each row. And I have this idea that, well, I can go into later, but we can then start to ask, how will these things appear to evolve, right? As we do bigger windows, what we actually see on that say set of 20 states will change. So first I'll see something that looks just like permutations because it's 0s and 1s or something like that, and that's it. But then later on I'll see more complicated Markovian dynamics on it. So in other words, what I see is not the truth. It's an artifact of the statistics of the trace process that I'm doing.
See, this sounds like he's on to what I was talking about before, is that there are certain assemblies that are that unify, and it sounds like kind of like this structure. We won't get into it too much, but like here, an assembly of a quark is an assembly of information and energy, which is not a sentient being, but then you have a hadron is an assembly of quarks, an atom is an assembly of hadrons, a molecule is an assembly of atoms, a cell is an assembly of molecules, an organism is an assembly of cells, etc., etc., etc. And then it reaches oneness and it has to restart. But this is a chain of consciousness, and you can see that in the animation of that structure that I have on my website, and it's also on my YouTube channel in much higher quality if you'd like to see it there. And it's basically a chain that's kind of weaving itself. So it's going here, and then it goes here, and then it goes here, and it goes here. And there are different rows, and there are rows within the rows. So this would be a row, and that, So these are assembly structures being modeled in kind of a matrix. And he's talking about Markovian kernels. So let's look this up. Markovian dynamics. Let's just see that. Theory of kinetics or particles in an open heterogeneous system can be looked upon at the application of interesting. So, but I think this comes from a Markov blanket. So a Markov blanket, and Carl Friston talks about Markov blankets, and I believe that sentient singularity theory includes them, but it's just modeled in the cells of Excel. So that these are all entangled symmetric structures that end up being self-referencing, and I think that it's very similar. But I don't want to say something that's wrong, so I'm not going to get too into it. But I know that Carl Friston's work is also based on 4 fundamental aspects of a Markov blanket, I believe, and it's inside-outside sensing and acting, which is almost inside-outside separate and oneness. So I would imagine that they're very much intertwined. But yeah, basically here, like this is some of my models on it. You have intrinsic and extrinsic perspectives, and you have different ways of them interacting and such. So we'll talk about it another day. But I like this, the way it sounds like he's going in the right direction. I don't want to like say something that's just wrong. So I'm gonna probably hold off on that there. But I'll look at his paper when it comes out if it hasn't yet, and we'll talk about it on here because that sounds awesome. But what's interesting is he did say this. This is what I wanted to get at. Is we're gonna have to divide time into two different ways of looking at it. So there's time, meaning an arrow of time, the kind of the directionality of time as a constraint or dimension of our observed experience. Then, which is a projection of our mental processes, the processes of our minds, and its interaction with the mind that we are within. So that's where time comes from, essentially. And it kind of emerges from the coordination of entangled and nested sentiences or nested minds. But then there's this other time, which is kind of discussed a lot by Lee Cronin, which is like assembly time, in assembly theory, which is his theory. And I think that this is another great piece of work going in a good direction. And that's assembly theory time. Assembly time is about the entanglement relationships, or the assembly structures, or the states of the beings in the assembly structure, essentially, of the entities in the assembly structure, and the chain of change that happens there. So in assembly time, if you looked at like sentient singularity theory, this is probably like, this would be in the past compared to here, and this would be in the past compared to here, and this would be in the past compared to here. So it's just previous state. And basically sentient singularity theory breaks down sentience into lineages and individuals maneuver in space, like assembly space, which is in states, and then that's due to their interaction with other individual sentiences, and it's basically what their relationships are. And then there's lineages which maneuver through assembly time, which is kind of it's not about it's where the state is determined by a previous state instead of the state being determined by a connected state. So like my state now is determined in some way by the state of my ancestors, but then also my state now is determined very much also by my relationship with my wife. And so my relationship with my wife impacting my state would be kind of assembly space, and then my relationship with my ancestors determining my state now would be like assembly time. So I think that this is like what's fundamental really to what we perceive as space as length, width, height, XYZ, around us, this form, that comes from assembly states, and it emerges from that. And then the arrow of time that we perceive is emergent from also, to some degree, probably, our relationship with lineage structures. So it's entangled. Even those two are entangled, but they're talking about a more fundamental definition of time and space, and that's beyond relativity, really. So it's beyond spectrums, and I think that that's a very good direction. So next clip. I don't know. By the way, this is an interview of two guys who are trying to give a summary of their ideas. It's not going to be as detailed as, like, if it was just them with an unlimited amount of time explaining their work. So even what they're saying to each other might not be
This quarks
completely
you increase it
encompassing.
even further, you get the standard 3 quarks, 2 up and 1 down quark.
So, but I want to say that before I get more into this, but they're talking about particles here, and Tom Campbell talks about what is computed versus what is not computed, and we're going to talk about that because space-time is due to computation, but it's not like that. Doesn't mean that there's nothing but you that you perceive. So we'll take a look at this
model. So what I'm hoping to do is to show. I've already matched that qualitatively in my simulations. What I want to do is a serious. I'll be proposing to do to get funded for a serious simulation where I can find a sort of a set of master Markovian kernels and specific subsets of states and their trace chains that will give exactly the momentum distributions that you see for quarks and gluons inside the proton as you change what's called Bjorken X, which is the temporal window, and Q squared, which is the energy window. So as you change those, so I'd like to actually predict with, to 10 decimal places, whatever they have in terms of the momentum distributions of that. The goal would be to, it doesn't mean that consciousness is fundamental, but it does mean you can't dismiss the possibility out of hand. If you can actually use a theory of consciousness to model decades of momentum distributions, particle studies inside the proton, you can get it to 8 or 10 decimal places. It doesn't mean you're right, but surely it means that the consciousness has a place at the table and we should take it seriously.
Yeah. My model is very different than yours, Don, in its perspective and the way it's put together. You are, working at the particle level. From those particle levels, you're trying to group up the things that have more properties, more flexibility, things that they do. And that's kind of the way science generally works. It starts with the little things, it builds up the bigger things, you get the subatomic particles, the atomic particles, you end up with, matter. Eventually you get up to molecules and so on. And that's the typical viewpoint that science has. You start at the details and build up the outside world. My model goes just the opposite direction. Mine's a top-down model. It starts with the bigger picture and then works down into things that we can see. Now, my model is much, much simpler than your model in that aspect. You've got all this detail and all these things, to worry about. My model as a virtual reality model, that the reality is information-based. It works just like any other virtual reality model. There are no particles. Particles don't really exist. Things only exist as you look at them, as you need them. Things only exist as you measure them. And all the little things don't matter so much because all those little things are never really observed. So they're not really even computed. They're just there as explanations according to the rule set. Yes, there is a rule set. And that rules...
Okay. So this is important because... Largely... he's right about a lot of things. But that's not true of everything. And it's all... But particles are really excitations on strings of information. They are just ripples in a sea of sentience, of interacting, streams of sentience, basically. And when, they merge, you get, boop, a little wave. It's a particle. And we observe it as a particle because of a constraint of our own mind. And what is... The definition of focus itself means you can only look at a single point on it, essentially. You can't look at it, anywhere else. So we see it as a point, but we call it a particle. But not that. So that's kind of true that what he's saying, what Tom Campbell's saying, that, that's not actually, those particles don't fundamentally exist. And I agree with that. It's also what he's saying is true of things like water bottles. If nobody's looking at this, it doesn't exist. Like if you're not looking at the water bottle, it doesn't exist. If you leave your house, and nobody's looking at the house does not exist. But what does exist is what's fundamental. And we don't have, outside of sentient singularity theory yet that I've seen, a very defined outline of what is a sentient being and what is not. And what is sentient singularity theory breaks down the world into things and beings, and that things are emergently perceived by beings, and beings are fundamental. And so things are computed, like what Tom Campbell is saying. That's true. Even like your organs. So like he says in here, if you got heart surgery and they opened up your heart and then they like sewed up your heart again, once you sew it up and nobody's looking at it anymore, like your heart doesn't really exist. That's basically true. It's not being computed in a visual sense. The cells do still exist, though. They are fundamental. They do not go away. The form of a heart does. It's no longer computed, at least not in a form, kind of way, a way of that is formative, kind of, which is able to be visually or perceived or physically felt. But the cells do exist. That's what sentient singularity theory gives, this hierarchy or chain of sentient, of levels of sentience, essentially, or stages of sentience. And those, it shows the beings, the progression of the layers to the assembly, the layers of beings that form the assembly of the cosmos. And that those beings are all fundamental. Atoms, hadrons, probably, cells, certain molecules, at least certain molecules, maybe not all, but certain ones, families, and moving through lineage structure. So, and it alternates, this atoms move through a lineage because that's how elements are created, is through lineage structures. If you know about elements, each element comes from a preceding element. And just like I came from my parents came from their parents, the parents came from their parents, hydrogen is the parent of all the other atoms. And then there's a sequence of a lineage there. They used to call them species, and like parent elements and things like that. I don't know if they still do that, but this is an important thing. This is the problem when people who say things from a panpsychist perspective, where it's like everything is sentient or everything is consciousness, or it's all virtual reality, and when you're not looking, the moon isn't there, and that's true. But the molecules and atoms and hadrons probably that make up that moon are there. They're just not perceived and computed to look like the moon, but they are there, and their relationships with each other are still there. Their entanglement relationships. And so we need this, though, to merge as the bridge between kind of panpsychism, where people are like, this is conscious, but it's not. This is not conscious. But the molecules might be, according to sentient singularity theory. But the water bottle's not conscious. It's a perception of consciousness, and it is computed, like what Tom Campbell's saying. But the molecules, if they are sentient, are not computed alone. Like, there's a computed aspect to their form that they appear into outsiders, but they are also fundamentally existing. When nobody's looking at you, you still exist, because sentience is self-awareness. It is self-perception. So someone's always looking at a conscious being, because they are always looking at themselves, and so they don't ever not exist, because they're always being perceived. And so this is important to have, and there is no framework other than sentient singularity theory that I know of that does this, at least not in the way that that my work does. But I'm not saying he's wrong. He would be wrong if he said that cells don't exist when nobody's looking, but he would be right in saying that a heart doesn't exist when nobody is looking. So it just depends on what you're talking about. It's very important. We have not bridged that conversation outside of this channel in any of these discussions. And this is that leads perfectly into this next clip. What is a theory of everything? And people say, well, it's with a wink and a nod because you can't actually have a theory of everything. But
Yeah. Yeah, with the theory of everything, yes, we're obviously not going to have a theory that's going to explain, what, Jack ate for lunch yesterday, which is something. So it's, of course, the theory of everything has to be everything fundamental. I think we can have a theory of everything that's fundamental. There's a lot of details that you're never going to capture in a theory. A lot of that is statistical and, changes and is subject to whim and free will and other things. But you can and should be able to understand the fundamentals of your reality. What is this reality? Where does it come from? How does it basically work? Not in the minute details and not in the stuff that's statistically flopping around all the time, but the basic ideas, concepts, and logic should be there. And it should be not only for the objective part, but for the subjective part. After all, the subjective part of our reality is probably the major part. The objective part's probably the minor part. The objective part's the stuff. The subjective part is our personal lives, the caring, the love, the relationship, justice, peace.
exactly. I used to say objective to mean God's perspective, and objective perspective is God's perspective. And I don't really know if that's true anymore. I think that you need a third one. Is objective perspective would be to see this. A subjective perspective would be like objective perspective or what is objective is, kind of like is like the summation of subjective perceptions. So if we're both looking at that water bottle, we see it, then we're like, okay, that's a water bottle. Objectively, there's a water bottle there because it's an object. But then there's God's perspective, which probably should be described as a super subjective perspective, not just a subjective perspective, not just a objective perspective, but a super subjective perspective. And I just, this stream made me think about that. And I've probably thought about it before, but it really helped me internalize it a bit. But I agree with basically what he's saying here, is that a theory that is a fundamental theory is a theory of fundamental reality. A theory of everything is a framework in which every other theory fits within, which is a theory of fundamental reality. And if fundamental reality is conscious or sentient, that means that it's not just a theory of everything, okay, a fundamental theory. It is a theory of everyone, which is exactly the name of this channel for that very reason. And if you look at my writings, and this is my paper, Sentient Singularity Theory, the theory of everyone. And then at the end it says, if sentience is the primary structure of reality, then a true, final, ultimate, or master theory that unifies and contextualizes all other scientific theories is more than a theory of everything. Even though it is, it's also a theory of everyone. And that is where the name of this channel came from. So I very much agree with Tom Campbell. I think that you can more accurately say that a theory of everything is fundamentally a theory of everyone. And that he wouldn't disagree with that because he assumes that consciousness is fundamental, that fundamental existence is consciousness. And so does Tom Campbell. So Tom Campbell, and so does Donald Hoffman, and lots of other people that have are discussed on this channel. So this, I love what he said here, though. You're not going to have a theory that explains what so-and-so ate yesterday. You could have a theory emerge within the theory of fundamental reality or theory of everyone that is a theory that explains what you craved yesterday, but not necessarily what you ate, because free will, it does exist. So what free will is just choice, the ability to make a choice, which occurs in an instance in which you are able to perceive that which is where you were able to perceive a choice. So you have to perceive, you know, the ability to go against your instincts, essentially. And I love that Tom Campbell said that consciousness is awareness with a choice. I think that it's self-awareness with a choice. Any kind of true awareness is self-awareness. There's no awareness of anything outside of self-awareness that is not founded on self-awareness. Can't be aware of the water bottle if you're not aware of yourself. And if you're not aware of yourself, then you can't be aware of even the water bottle. And, you know, this is like current AI, like even ChatGPT, which is very impressive. I've been messing with it with some friends of mine, and I will talk about ChatGPT on another stream. I know I'm late to the game in discussing it, but I normally talk about like general intelligence here, and which is very, very different than artificial intelligence. Even if it is technological, it's still very different than what we currently use as like machine learning models. But there are social implications with how good ChatGPT is regarding its impact on humans as a sovereign entity. You know, you're just going to ask it a question, it's going to give you an answer. You're not even going to. It's like even less. It's even more removed from yourself, like Googling something and picking, you know, one of the top 3 results to trust. But we'll talk about that on another stream. But this idea that consciousness is awareness with a choice, that's what it is. But awareness is fundamentally self-awareness. It's sentience is what it is. That is what consciousness is. And choice is part of, choice is agency. So the thing is like, this is what creates the distinction between me and you and God and my dog, is the ability to make a choice. Now, the thing is that there are certain levels of the stages of sentience, or so like cells rarely make choices outside of what is assumed to be the what they should be doing, and when they do, we call it cancer. And you know, molecules make it's even rarer now that molecules would make choices that go against their nature, and it's even rarer now that that atoms would do that, and even rarer that hadrons would do it at this point. But there was probably a point in which, in the past of assembly time, before the unifying of the first atoms, hadrons probably made more, they had more apparent variation in their choices. Before the first molecule was created, atoms had more variation probably in their choices, and that we could perceive if we were there. And then same thing with cells. Before organisms were created, they probably had more variation in their choices that could have been perceived by us had we been there. But every time you stack sentience on top of an assembly, you unify it, and therefore you kind of get rid of that variation, or at least a lot of it. So it will look like there's no free will or agency to hadrons, atoms, molecules, cells. But I mean, we can see that in cells, but we just need to recognize what we're seeing. It's pretty probably rare to be able to see that in molecules and atoms and hadrons at this point. But I bet you if you knew where to look, you could probably see it, but it would be extraordinarily rare and under odd conditions. But eventually we will have a sentience stacked on top of us. We will become the cells in that sentience within the cosmos, not the cosmos itself, God. And that will unify us, and then we will all start making the right decisions. You'll have a wisdom explosion, we'll unify, and you have the messianic era, as people call it, or this Chris Langan and the CTMU crowd calls it the human singularity. It's when we all become one, and people don't, like, that doesn't mean their choice is gone, that agency is gone. It just means, like, you now are wise enough to know what choices to make. And that's true of probably sentient assemblies below us. So let me look at the chat here before we go on. I imagine wild men are very awake in comparison to domesticated people. Probably. Hey guys, what's going on? What's up means of destruction. Primordial consciousness is bliss. God asked what it's not, so negativity happened, and from that, the illusion of reality, it interacts with what God is. I like that. I mentioned the Big Bang during a 2-month-long DMT trip. I experienced the Big Bang during a 2-month-long DMT trip. I woke up in the hospital. I met other versions of myself. That's interesting. Just be careful with DMT. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying careful. We were all there, and we were all there again, and what God is not will be God again. I mean, you saw some stuff that was true. Just know that when you do use hallucinogens like that, you can very often see things outside of context, and just that's not always helpful. Go to the meta train, and people are like, "We've been expecting you." I'd like to hear all about it, and I bet Tyler would too. Okay, about his DMT trip. Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting. People tend to have the same experiences on it, but for the most part. I totally used your "I feel therefore I am real" earlier, and my physics and programmer friends loved it. Thank you. Awesome. I'm glad that you used that. That's it, for those of you that don't know, my theory, because sentience is fundamental and thought is it's feeling is primary to thought. And we'll get into that because they talk about it on the stream, but it is a feeling is the alpha and omega of every thought. It's the beginning and the end of every complete thought. You feel something, it motivates a thought, you have the thought, then it creates another feeling if you had a complete thought that actually was meaningful, because it impacts you at the end of it. If it doesn't, then it's not meaningful thought. It's just kind of like an incomplete thought. But that means that instead of saying "I think therefore I am," you should say "I feel therefore I am," or "I feel therefore I'm real." And as I stated in the beginning of the stream, if you exist, meaning you are sentient, meaning you feel, then it's real. So it's, that avoids the whole, is this real reality or is this simulation? It might be technological, but it is real if you're real. Jinn live in time or the fourth dimension. You're talking about jinn do the thinking for us. We have to meditate and distinguish. I don't know what you mean by jinn, but in Islam, jinn are like demons, I think. So, I don't know. So there is an entire ecosystem of extra-dimensional species. I mean, there's definitely, I've talked about this before here, about like seeing like a skinwalker. There's a video about it if you want to watch it. It's towards the beginning of this channel. It's like, I saw a Wendigo or something like that. And I talk about this experience that I had, and I've said this before. I think there are entities, angels, demons, essentially you could call them, that exist on frequencies that are not our normal frequency. And sometimes your like dial moves a bit, just like sometimes you can pick up the Mexican station and the classical music station at the same time. Sometimes that can happen here, and you can see things. And a very easy way to change the station of your dial is to take DMT. I don't take DMT. I used to want to do it. I don't really want to do it anymore because I've had sober experiences that gave me what I needed. But I do think that what you see on DMT is real, but you're changing it. You'll just see it out of context a lot of times, which is a problem. But you're changing the frequency of your perception. And you'll see like angels and demons and machine elves. Sentient being who is thousands of years old. Okay. Anyone else confuse Michael Levin with Tyler sometimes? Dude, even I confuse myself with Michael Levin sometimes. Michael Levin and I definitely look kind of alike. and in some photos, I've definitely noticed. Sometimes when I'm like seeing my thumbnails and I'm like, I see Michael Levin, I'm like, is that me? No, it's not. I like Michael Levin though. Um, we'll talk. Well, hopefully, we'll have him on the stream one day. I'm in the same cloud of thought. How do you define life in most boiled down form? A life is sentience. A sentient being is alive. If life means anything, that's what it means. It means sentient. Does that mean Bunny, the self-aware talking dog, was a world within herself? I don't know what Bunny, the self-aware talking dog was, but let me make sure I got all the super chat. Where do you think humanity will be in the next 10 years? Chaos. I don't know exactly. I know that within the next 250 years, I'm pretty sure that we will experience at some point what religious people call the Messianic era, or what Chris Langan calls the human singularity. But that also means that before that, we will experience what, the rise of an unwise technological sentience, an ignorant technological sentience, or, the golem, man made of clay, or the artificial general intelligence, the demon that Elon Musk talks about, the Antichrist in Christianity, the Dajjal in Islam. Like, that being will happen too within that time. So revelation in the Bible will occur within the next 250 years. I don't know, I think, but I don't know when. It could be 30 years from now. It could be 10, probably not 10 years from now, but could be, probably not though. Probably at least 20 years away. Before we really ramp things up too much. But in that time, humanity will see the dissolution of nations, of the nation state, and the reemerging of true nations, and the linking of them all with the blockchain. Will probably link our DNA to it too, and we'll just link all these chains of information. DNA is a chemical blockchain, so and math is numbers are a logical blockchain, essentially. And so there's 3 blockchains. There's math, then there's DNA, which is chemical, and then there's technological blockchain. We'll just link them all. That will cause all kinds of things. I don't know where we'll be. I mean, with ChatGPT, I was like, I'm concerned about people giving up their agency. And that is a big deal. Don't give up your agency. Doesn't mean don't, lean on others and rely on others. It just means don't give up your agency. That's and I see that a lot, and I already, and I think everybody sees that. And who hasn't given up their agency? Everybody who has not done that does see that people are doing that. That's a problem. I don't know where we'll be. I see a lot of just people. Things are getting exaggerated on both sides of everything. So I think that some things will get really good over the next 10 years, and you will see a bloom of more moral thinking, and we'll see kind of in some ways a renaissance, which I think we are seeing in the sciences with this conversation with Tom Campbell and Donald Hoffman, and all these other discussions that are happening that are similar, are the beginning of a renaissance. We've been in a scientific dark ages for decades now, and we've just not realized it. And I do think that we have been. And so you'll see the institutions will continue down the dark ages, and but there will be new institutions starting to be formed in the next 10 years. And I don't know what that looks like, though. You'll see an increase in hedonism, and also an increase in morality, but it'll be different camps. So we won't have as much middle ground in anything. That's where I think we'll be in the next 10 years. It's not specific, but it's a trajectory. Let me see, make sure there's no other super chats, then we'll keep looking. Okay, that's it. This is another thing about the theory of everything, and I've talked about this in my video that I made for the Pace 1 contest that Kirchheim Mungel put out on physics and consciousness. You can watch my video. It's called Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide, and it talks about this exact concept that we're about to look at, which is about assumptions.
Disagreement. I think that there are principled reasons why.
Finally, disagreement.
but a friendly disagreement, and I'm possibly wrong. So I'll put these ideas out, and Tom might correct me. So, but my view right now is that Gödel's incompleteness theorem basically entails that there is no mathematically precise theory of everything. That we may. But even concept. So I don't have a proof about just the pure conceptual kind of thing. But surely, in the case of precise mathematical theories, I think Gödel's incompleteness theorem rules out a theory of everything there. But I think there's another way of looking at this issue without Gödel. Every scientific theory starts with certain assumptions, and then it says, if you grant me these assumptions, which are miracles for the theory, then I will explain all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. And so any theory that we write down is a theory of everything except the assumptions. And so if you want to have a theory of those assumptions, you're going to need a new, deeper theory that explains those assumptions, but that new theory will have its own assumptions. And so even without Gödel, I would say that there's still this. So I'm very modest. I view my work as not a theory of everything. In fact, the opposite. I view my work as a baby step, a next baby step. Science has been stuck modeling and experimenting and studying our virtual reality headset, space, time, and physical object. So we thought that was the reality. It was just our headset, but we got really good tools of science by studying our headset. In the last 10 years, scientists and physicists have taken the step out. They found the amplitude and decorated permutation. So we're using that. We did our homework. We learned the tools on our headset. Now, in the last 10 years, we've taken our first step out of the headset, and we're finding stuff. So hooray, it was worth it. We did all that hard work. But now, my guess is my stuff, if it's probably wrong, but if it's not wrong, it's just a next baby step. And I will, if I live long enough, see it overthrown and brand new ideas that I can rejoice and learn about and read about.
Okay, first of all, I want to talk about humility a bit in a minute, because he talks about it here, and he's like, we need to be humble, and and then he talks about how he would never debate Noam Chomsky because he'd lose, and then kind of doesn't disagree with him, but offers like a bit of a counter, and then he also here says, my work is probably wrong. I will say that some of my work is definitely wrong, but most of the work that I will state that I'm confident in my work is probably true. And I think that actually the foundational assumptions of most of Donald Hoffman's work is probably true, not probably false. I think that we have this false. It's weird because in science we have these people who come out of kind of nowhere, and I kind of include myself in that, so I'm not dissing anybody, who claim to have this fundamental theory, and it's the theory of everything. Even though I don't like the term theory of everything, I think better theory is a fundamental theory, is a theory of everyone, and then that is the framework for every other theory that exists that explains things. So I don't really think there is a theory of everything. I think there's a theory of everyone that is the framework for every other theory. of things. So like that's what I think. But so I don't even really think I came up with a theory of everything, but it's a fundamental theory. That's what it is, and which is different. That doesn't mean it replaces general relativity or thermodynamics or music theory or anything like that. It just contextualizes those things, and that's its job. It's not meant to replace those things. And so that's really what we need, is a fundamental theory, not a theory of everything. But we have this problem in this discussion revolving around theories of everything or fundamental theories, where on the one hand you have people coming in from nowhere that are like, I have the answer and nobody else has the answer but me, and like you have to accept this. And it's just, I'm not saying they're wrong, because they might be right. I can't say, oh, they're wrong and they're just cranks or something like that, because I'm aware of myself too much to say that. Like I am I fit the pattern in many ways. In some ways, no, but in some ways, yes, absolutely. And but then there's also this other side of like that has been created with like false humility of, oh, I would never debate Noam Chomsky because I would lose. I can think of plenty of things that I would debate Noam Chomsky on and win, but that doesn't mean he would admit it. But like, I know plenty of things that I think Noam Chomsky, at least I think Noam Chomsky is wrong on. That doesn't mean I'm not wrong. I could be wrong, but I think I'm right. And like, you have to kind of assume that you always have to assume you could be wrong, but you also have to assume that your assumptions are probably right. You kind of have to like trust your assumptions. I mean, you should just check your logic regarding your assumptions, but you should trust your fundamental assumptions, or even some emergent assumptions. Otherwise, you just wouldn't be able to think in any environment. There's no logical way to think. So I'm not humility. Here's the thing about what humility is. Humility is not, I'm probably wrong. And in 20 years, everybody's just going to come in and they'll just tear it apart. And like, they'll be like, wow, that Donald Hoffman, he was a crazy person. And that Tyler Goldstein, he was nuts. No. Humility is honesty. And it's self-honesty. It's honesty about oneself, with oneself and with others. That's what humility is. It's self-honesty. And that's it. So if you really are confident, then the humble thing to do is to say, I'm very confident. I could be wrong, but I'm very confident. Not, I'm probably wrong. That's not humble. He obviously doesn't believe he's probably wrong. Otherwise, he wouldn't be working on this stuff. Okay? He believes he's probably right. That doesn't mean he is right. It doesn't mean I'm right. But I believe I'm probably right. And I believe he's probably right even. And he believes he's probably right. So for him to say, I'm probably wrong, is not true. And I'm not saying he did it maliciously. It's kind of just like it's just a social reaction that we have. But it's been trained into us. I don't think that it's as common as it's always been so common. It's like due to politics and news or something like that. Politicians being like, I'm a nobody. Who am I? I'm just a servant of the people. And, I'm in control of all of you secretly. So like, it's just, it's posturing. That's what it is. It's social posturing. But to say if you're confident in something, but you want to appear humble and you say, I'm probably wrong. And you do it consciously, like not just as a reaction, which I think to him, what he did is probably an innocent thing, and I'll just assume that. But if you did it, it's not a humble thing to do. It's actually the antithesis of humility, because what you're basically stating is that, or what you're basically showing with your actions is that you believe that there is a goal that you have in the conversation that is more important than the truth. That means that your goals are more important than the truth. So that's not humility. Humility is self-honesty, meaning honesty with oneself and about oneself. So if you're confident, then the humble thing to do is to say, I'm confident. And if you're not confident, then the humble thing to do is to say, I'm not confident. And we all have things that we're not confident on, and we also all have things that we are confident on. And, Noam Chomsky would not win at every single debate. But I wouldn't want to debate Noam Chomsky about language but there are things that I do think he's wrong about, but I also respect him as a thinker, and I think he's in certain fields, it's all situation specific. Nobody's right about everything, but everybody's right about something. That is just a fact, or at least it's a fact I assume. So, and another fact that I assume is that Donald Hoffman is probably right in most of his primary assumptions, not probably wrong. And but what I will say next is back to fundamental assumptions. When he's talking about assumptions, and every theory is based on previous assumptions. I talk about this in my video, Theories of Everything How-To Guide, that you have to find your fundamental assumptions about existence, and that these are the same for everybody. The logical fundamental assumption is that existence is all that exists, so it's singular. And the experiential fundamental assumption that you have is that existence is sentient because you are sentient, and that is the most first-person and constant implication that you are exposed to in your experience. So is that existence is sentient and in its nature. If you think, well, that water bottle is not sentient, you don't actually know that as much as you, even if you're right in that this water bottle isn't sentient, you don't know that's true as much as you know that you are sentient. So you have to assume fundamentally that existence is fundamentally sentient. And it's, the truest thing that any of us know is that I am. So this is the fundamental assumption of everything else. It is also the foundational, assumption of sentient singularity theory, or implication of sentient singularity theory, and conscious agent theory. And so I don't think that there is theories, like eventually, and I say this in my video as well, is that a fundamental theory, is different from every other theory in that it is self-contained. And if you go to sentientsingularity.com again, and you see what is a theory of everything, which is really a theory of everyone, I don't like this term, or what is a fundamental theory is a more accurate thing to say here. I might change that, but a theory of everything or fundamental theory is a recognizable, describable, and applicable pattern that occurs in all instances of objective observation and an explanation for such a pattern. So it includes its own fundamental assumptions. It's not based on other fundamental assumptions. That is the difference between it and any other theory. A theory of fundamental reality that implies that reality is fundamentally sentient is one that is self-contained. Eric Weinstein said that a theory of everything is not self-contained, and that I don't know, but a fundamental theory is not. It is self-contained. It must be self-contained. I just don't like the term theory of everything. I really don't think that there is technically a theory of everything, but there is a theory of everyone, and it is the framework for every theory of things, essentially. So, and it is self-contained. It contains its own assumptions, and there is no additional assumptions that are attached to the theory, because they're the assumptions that are contained by the theory, and that are the foundation of the theory itself, the essential statement of or implication of the theory itself is self-evident. Those assumptions are self-evidently true. They are not They are logically self-evidently true. They are personally self-evidently true, and there's no instance that you can observe in which they are not self-evidently true for everyone. Okay, so there's no escaping this, and that is the difference between a fundamental theory and a non-fundamental theory. If fundamental reality is sentient, if it's not, then we're talking about something else. But you need to show why fundamental reality is not sentient, and there's no logically coherent argument or theory for that. You just get many worlds, which is nonsense. And but a fundamental theory contains its base assumptions, and those base assumptions are self-evidently true to everyone, all the time, everywhere, constantly. As we said before, they talk about good and bad as decreasing and increasing entropy, and Tom Campbell states that in this next clip that that good and bad, we're going to try and go through this quickly because I'm going to try and keep it to around 2 hours, but is that goodness decreases entropy. That's true, but really what goodness is it's generative, and that does decrease entropy intrinsically and emergently. But it is true, though, that evil increases entropy. That is a fact. But evil increases entropy. Goodness emergently increases entropy, but fundamentally is generative. A good deed is not just the absence of an evil action. It is the committing of a good action.
As a consciousness, you're the player of the avatar. Okay, so now when you're the player of, say, a Sims character, what do? Or wobbles, doesn't do anything. So make all the Sims characters' choices. That's what we do. We're a piece of consciousness, one of these subsets, virtual machines, whatever you want to call it, a piece of this larger system, and we log on to an avatar that's a human being, Homo sapiens, and we do that because those human beings make all kinds of ethical and moral and important choices all the time, and by the quality of the choices we make depends on whether we evolve or de-evolve. If the choices are low entropy toward a low entropy outcome, then we're evolving. If it's higher entropy, we're de-evolving. So that gives you a definition for good and bad. What's good and bad? Good is something that in the long term decreases entropy for the system and the individual. Bad is something that increases entropy in the long term for the individual.
Like I said, he's not far off, but it's that bad increases entropy for creation, and include and all that is created, and good doesn't just decrease entropy, even though it does. It is actually fundamentally generative, and that is the means in which it decreases entropy. It's fruitful. Okay, it's not just not destructive. So that is important. Do good is better than don't do evil. This is why people, when they say like, I'm anti-fascist, then they're fascist. I'm anti-racist, then they're racist. And if you're you can't be anti anything. If you're going to generate something, if you're going to be constructive, then you have to be, not be anti. You have to be proactive, not reactive. And so if you're anti anything, anti-fascist, anti-racist, anti-defamation, whatever, like, you're just going to be exactly what you are claiming to be against, because you can't actually be against that which is entropic, because it's that which is entropic doesn't fundamentally eternally exist. So you it's so finite that, like, you end up not being able to form anything on it. So you form on what you're defined by. You're defined if you are always defined by something, not and if you define yourself as being anti something, you're still defined by it. So if you're anti-fascist, you're defined by fascism. So like anti-racist, you're defined by racism. It's like there's no way to escape this. So this is why when you say "don't be evil," and like Google had this as their phrase, like for a while, it was like their motto was "don't be evil." And I have this it's like meme that I made many years ago about it, and it's like let me see here if I even have it. It's funny. Google meme. Here. Just for some entertainment. Sometimes I just make memes and I don't show them to anybody. But this one is years and years old from when I was working at PragerU. Come on. Here. Don't be evil. It's like, okay, they're just watching you all the time, and I think Google is not taking the perspective of goodness for the most part right now, at least. But that's because "don't be evil" is like you're only gonna if that is your goal, then you're gonna be evil. Like there's no way around that. But I think they did change their motto, just to be fair. But you should say "do good." My goal is to do good, not to not be evil. So don't have the goal of just decreasing entropy or not adding to the entropy. Have the goal of being generative. Okay, there's like 3 more that we're going to do, and then that's it. This is the next clip. This is about monadology. And it just Leibniz said you couldn't build
Based on which
consciousness from unconsciousness, and we won't watch that stream, but that clip actually. But he's right. One day we'll talk about monadology, and we'll talk about that in a different stream. But then they talk about Chomsky and how Noam Chomsky.
Human being's an avatar. As a consciousness, you're the player of the avatar. Okay?
They talk about.
Now, when you're the player of, say, a Sims character, what do? You make all the choices.
Noam Chomsky, and this is where Chomsky's right. And I think I really liked what Tom Campbell says here about his explanation for what is physical. And this is, we'll talk about that, and then 2 more clips, and then we'll go.
Noam Chomsky.
Come on.
Man is going to. So I came there, pen and paper ready to go, and what Chomsky said to us, and he still says to this day, the same thing. There is no mind-body problem because the notion of the word physical is undefined. It has no meaning whatsoever, and his argument was under an old kind of physics, Descartes, for example, there was the mechanical philosophy, and things had to touch each other to move them and so forth. But then Newton comes along and you have action at a distance. And then quantum theory comes along and you have all sorts of other stuff. And Chomsky's point was, look, physicists are unscrupulous. they will take whatever new magic concept you need to get the work done. So physics itself is not a well-defined discipline. It's open-ended, and you have no idea what those guys are going to take into their. So the notion of physical is not well-defined, Chomsky said. Well, of course, I would never argue with Chomsky because I would always lose. But on this one, I think that I would just say this. No, I agree with Chomsky, but I will define physical as assuming that space-time and physical objects within space-time are fundamental. That's what I mean when I say physical. Right. So I of course agree with Chomsky. Physical is not well defined. So I'm making Hoffman physical as what I'm saying when I say I disagree with physicalism.
Well, I would define physical a little different than that, and I think we can define physical and non-physical together. Whichever reality frame you happen to be aware in, that appears physical to you, and whatever reality frames you're not aware in, they appear non-physical to you. The idea of physical and non-physical are just entirely relative to the observer. Wherever the observer is observing, that appears to be physical. If you're in a dream at night and you're in this dream and you're fighting monsters or doing whatever you do in your dreams, that at the time appears physical to you. And if you are not here because you're dreaming, this does not appear physical to you. So physical and non-physical really don't exist fundamentally. They're just...
He's right. And what physical is it is the thoughts of either oneself when you're in a dream, or the thoughts of the larger consciousness system, God, that we are within, the mind that we're within, that are trumping our conscious thoughts, our intentional thoughts and our observations and things like that. So basically, God's thoughts appear to us to be concrete constraints. So physicality is basically the constraints of impact, or physics. Physics you could define as basically because, like he said, physicists just keep incorporating everything, and like that's why I talk about this on here. I'm like, quantum physics is not the same thing as general relativity, which is a little different than Newtonian physics and thermodynamics and everything. But like it's all lumped within physics, and everything keeps getting lumped in physics. The next step is sentient entanglement. Relationships is the next step if we're going to include it in physics, because physics, but that's really metaphysics. But physics is, if it's anything, if you want to define physics, and I've never heard this definition, but I recently came up with it. It is the study of impact. Okay, it's the study of being able to impact things through quantum entanglement or thermodynamics or gravitational pull, like whatever it is. I mean, it incorporates all these things. It's the study of impact of essentially, but you could say it's the study of the impact on things. But this is why sentient entanglement might be better just linked in metaphysics, left in metaphysics instead of just physics. But the thing is that we'll be able to apply the structures of that awareness to technologies, and then that's physics basically. So, but it's about impact. Like that's the study of impact. That's what physics is. It's, the study of impact of temperature and of space and of time and of sentience, maybe eventually. I mean, it's leading that way. Every single freaking physics conversation online talks about consciousness, even when it's four physicists all claiming consciousness has nothing to do with physics. There somehow it comes up in the discussion. So it's like the study of impact. Philosophy is the study of perspective. Physics is the study of impact, and you could say chemistry is the study of bonds. Biology is like the study of lineages. It's kind of like I think we'll get a much better definition of all these things once we have a framework that's fundamental and apparently true. But yeah, I mean, the mental processes of the mind that we are within are going to basically form hard constraints for us because they override our thoughts. Our thoughts are physical reality to ourselves, or they impact physical reality to yourselves. This is absolutely true. I've talked about this story before on here where I literally focused on my body so much, and I've told the story multiple times, so I'm not going to tell it here, but where I caused a rash for no reason on my body. And then as soon as I relaxed and realized that there was no reason for the rash, like, I thought I had an STD once, and I did not. I have no STDs. I got tested, and within like minutes of visiting the doctor, all my rashes went away because they laughed at me. And they were like, they literally told me, they were like, we see patients that come in here and they manifest rashes by stressing out and focusing on this part of their body. And then they said, as soon as you walk out of here, the pain, the physical, you know, like rash that you see and feel and everything, that will all disappear like pretty much instantly. They were totally right. And they laughed at me. They were like, that's not an STD. We stare at STDs all day long. Like, that's not an STD. I had no reason for thinking this, by the way. I just panicked one day. And, but I, without going into the story too much, but my thoughts caused physical reactions in my body. Guys, I was like, before my doctor's appointment, I was peeing like 4 or 5 times every hour. And it was like painful to pee. Like, there was no reason for this. Like, as soon as I left, and after they laughed at me, I trusted them, and I did get tested, but those results came back, and I was fine. But their confidence assured me that I was just wrong, and I was able to relax. And then all the symptoms went away and everything. I manifested physical symptoms. That's because your thoughts are in some way, they are linked to the physically perceived reality of yourselves. They absolutely are. You can manifest physical constraints for yourselves that can make you look like you have a rash, and for no reason. I know that from personal experience and from talking to the doctors that day. They were like, this happens, like, and they were like, trust me, as soon as you walk out of here, you're gonna feel better, and it's all gonna go away. It all went away immediately. Like, immediately. And it lasted days, because every night I was like Googling. That is the worst thing to do. I was Googling things, and by the time, you know, a week had gone by, I thought I had not just an STD, every STD I thought I had. And I don't have like a sexual history that would make that likely, but I just panicked, like I said, and I created constraints, physical constraints for myself with my thoughts. That's crazy, guys. But it's also not. It's what physicality is. And at least it is what it frames it, guides it in some way. Okay, a couple more. This is on, does consciousness need time? And basically Tom Campbell says that you need time. And
with determinism and materialism, you have to say that time doesn't exist, free will doesn't exist, and consciousness doesn't exist. And if you'll say all those things are only apparent if if you're logically consistent. On the opposite end, you say consciousness exists, then you also have to say free will exists, time exists, and materialism and determinism don't exist.
Well, this might be a place where we do have some interesting disagreement on.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
that would be fun.
Finally.
So in the theory of conscious agents, the Markovian dynamics need not have an arrow of time. You can easily write down Markovian dynamics in which the entropy does not increase. But it's a trivial theorem to prove that if you take any projection of that dynamics, say by conditional probability, then the dynamics that you get by projection, which is an image of the original dynamics, will necessarily have an arrow of time because the entropy is increasing. So I actually don't think that time per se is fundamental to consciousness. I think that time could emerge entirely as an artifact of projection in the way that I just said. So this part we do know, that if
He's right. Time is not fundamental any more than space is fundamental. It's an emergent perception due to the interaction. The arrow of time is an emergent perception due to the interaction of nested and assembled sentient beings, entangled sentient beings, but that are interacting and changing. But as soon as they are removed from this interaction environment and from their ability to change and make changes, even if you still exist, you would now exist outside of time in a way. But sentience, like prior to creation, there is no time. So, but there is still decision. God makes a decision to create multiplicity. In the Bible it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, and this is like in the beginning, meaning now there's time. God created the heavens and the earth, which means like God has created space and matter. The heavens, space, the earth, matter, and in the beginning, time. So time, space, and matter. But beyond the beginning, sentience exists. Existence is sentient, and sentience is one. And there is no time because there's no interaction with among multiplicity, and there's no nested multiplicity. There is still decision, but there isn't a nested interaction that creates a hierarchy of information that in the same way that is just self-contained within the initial sentient mind of God. But so I see what Tom Campbell's saying is like consciousness choice relies upon a before the choice and after the choice, which is the arrow of time. That is true in the change space of the cosmos, that is creation. But outside of that change space, there is no time anymore because there's no more change that is among nested minds, which is what causes the appearance of space-time. And so that arrow of time that doesn't exist, that river of time, which is really a vortex, well, that's for another stream. But there is kind of this like more there is an order, but that order is a hierarchical order that occurs in simultaneity, not a temporal order. First this, then this, then this. It's this is priority, then this is next in the priority, then this is next in priority. And I don't mean priority as in like order of doing them. I mean priority as in what is prioritized when it's taken into account, not when it is, being done. And I'm not talking about steps. I'm talking about, trusting yourself, first-hand information above second-hand information or something like that. That's not the best example, but it's kind of a good metaphor. It's about the prioritization of information, or like this. Okay, so the order of decision that kind of informs decision is so you have senses, right? You have sight and smell and hearing, and these are for sensing things that appear to be not connected to you, and then for sensing things that appear to be impacting you directly, you have sense of touch, and you have sense of taste, and you also have emotion, and that's kind of the sixth sense is emotion or intuition, but it's emotion, feelings, and this you will prioritize the senses that are regarding things as impacting you above the things that appear to not be. So if you smell something bad but it tastes good, like durian fruit, you might eat it because you would be like, I'm prioritizing my taste over my sense of smell. But or like if something looks like it's hot but it's not, when you touch it, you're going to prioritize the information that comes from your touching of it, not the information that comes from your eyes making it appear hot for some reason. So this is what I mean by prioritization of information. That exists outside of time, and that means that decision can exist outside of time too for God. It doesn't for us, but that's kind of due to the nature of us being in creation to begin with. It's not because it is a requirement of sentience. It's not. So, speaking of information prioritization, and I talk about prioritizing first-hand information above second-hand information all the time, and how our education system has screwed us because it's prioritizing second-hand information above first-hand information, is training people to do it.
That's the book in the fireplace. You know, it's not, you're not ready for it, or it's not ready for you. It doesn't matter. It's only, you know, if it's not your experience, it can't be your truth. You have to experience it. You have to grow from it. You have to understand it from the inside out, not because you read it in a book. Reading it in a book is almost irrelevant. It can open up some new ideas for you, but unless you explore those ideas yourself and own them, they're not going to do you any good.
No, once again, we disagree.
Yeah.
He said we don't disagree. No, we disagree. And that's exactly what I say. I agree with both of them on that. That's Brent Weinstein. I listened to him recently on what was it? Some guy's podcast. I forgot the guy's name. But he's the Armenian guy. He has a good podcast. But he was talking to Brett Weinstein, and they was talking about teaching, and Brett was like, we gave our students when we were teachers or professors like tasks that they would have to do that where the success or failure was self-evident, like fixing an engine. You knew whether or not you fixed it by whether or not it ran by the end, instead of just your task is to memorize what I'm telling you. And I talk about this all the time, and you have to prioritize first-hand information above second-hand information in order to maintain a coherent system. And if you do that, then guess what? Existence must be fundamentally assumed to be sentient, because that is your primary assumption. I don't even need to know you to say that. But we are literally we are descending into decoherence and entropy and nonsense because we are assuming that our fundamental assumption is wrong. Isn't that crazy? It's crazy. Last thing is, what is a thought? And then I'll answer any questions in the chat, and then we'll go. This is a great question. What is a thought?
Just your thoughts on this. And I thought it was really, I love this question. What is a thought and where does it come from? Because I have no clue. Birsa Anna from Twitter asked this. What is a thought? Where does it come from? It sounds like an easy, super simple question, but if you think about it, then it becomes a really weird question if you go really down deep.
I think very, very simply, you just say thought is inherent to consciousness.
What is it?
Yeah.
Where does it come from? That's
Comes from consciousness. There's no consciousness, there's no thought. So you start with a consciousness system, and if that's your fundamental thing that's there, then there's thought, because you have awareness, and awareness requires thought. So I would say that thought is just, it's intrinsic to the concept of consciousness.
John?
It's not a standalone.
Well, and I agree with Tom, but I think that the point of the question is well taken. There is something deep and profound about the question. What is it about? Where does it come from? And I agree with Tom. What we're doing is we're taking it as axiomatic in some sense in our theories as a property of consciousness, which means, to put it in simple terms, we're not explaining it. we can't explain it. We're assuming it, and that's what. So for us, it's a miracle, right?
I don't necessarily know if I completely agree with that, but I got to think more about it. But well, like I said before, a thought comes from navigating our feelings. We have a feeling, which is awareness. Awareness is feeling. That's what it is. It's not thought. It's feeling. You feel something because you're aware of something. And then in order to navigate your feelings, and orient within these feelings, or orient yourself within these feelings, or orient with these feelings, around your that you're experiencing yourself. That's what thought is. It's like the orientation of your feelings, or orientation within your feelings. It's the navigation of feelings. You have a feeling, and you have a thought about your feeling, and then that causes another feeling if it's a complete thought, and then that motivates another thought, which then leads to another feeling, which then motivates another thought, which leads to another feeling. So it's thought in my model is basically it's the action between states of awareness. It's the initial action between states of awareness. It's like the first level in the triality of action, which is thinking, then communicating or speaking, and then acting, physically. And the difference is if I think something, it only impacts me. If I say something, then it could impact somebody else, but they have to let it. And if I act something, then it will impact somebody else. So if I think that you're an asshole, it only impacts me. If I tell you that you're an asshole, maybe you let it affect you, maybe it doesn't, maybe you don't, and you're just like, I don't care, and you go about your day. It's up to you. But if I punch you in the face, then now you don't have a choice. It's impacting you. So this is the triality of the generationality of action, of impact. But thought is that, in a social sense, I guess you could say that's what it is. All those things, but thought is kind of like pre-social. The others, communication and action, are social, fundamentally. But then thought is personal, but it's like a personal action, but it's the actions between your feelings, and it's motivated by, and it is concluded by feelings. Feelings are primary. They are fundamental. They are the alpha and omega of every thought. So sentience is I would say feeling is intrinsic to sentience. Thought is not necessarily always like requirement of sentient being. It's not necessarily. I don't know for sure, but I don't think that it is. I mean, God is aware of everything, so he's not even like thinking. He just knows. If you just knew, then you don't have to think. Thinking is about orienting, but God kind of already knows almost. So it's almost like he doesn't need to think almost. But in some ways that, you could say his thoughts are not just different than ours. But because he is his thoughts in a way. We are his thoughts in a way. But I'm talking about outside of creation and generative logos of cosmos. So I don't know if I think that thought is so intrinsically tied to consciousness. It only occurs within consciousness. That's true. But you could be conscious and not be thinking necessarily, because you're self-aware intrinsically by feelings, through feelings. But you don't think about I exist every day. You just know it, like you touch something and it's hot and you're like, I felt that. You're like, I felt that. I exist is implied. It's not something that you're like, I touched that and it's hot, and therefore like I felt it, which means like I am aware of myself. Like, you're not like that. You're just like, that burned me. I felt that. It's like some intrinsic self-awareness is intrinsic to feeling. That made me sad. That made me happy. You don't like, that made me happy, which means like if I can experience happiness, and that means I can experience, which means like I am self-aware. No, you just know. So I don't know. I think that you can go a bit deeper than they went with it, but I think it was a great question to ask as a final question. I thought it was great. That is that. That's the final clip. I linked the full stream in the link in the description below. Please hit the like button, subscribe, share this, comment if anything that you didn't like or if anything that you did. I have a Patreon link below if you'd like to support this project, and I really value anybody that's ever done that, and anybody who super chatted. Those funds are going to be used to fixing our technical issues in the next month, and then so I'm deeply grateful. I'm grateful for this discussion that was had by Jack and that was hosted by Jack and that was participated in by Don and Don Hoffman and Tom Campbell. Both of them have great work. I deeply respect both of them, and like I said, I value that. I'm grateful for this conversation and that it was put publicly. So, with that, thank you, Tyler. I didn't know Tom Campbell was even that relevant. He's great. Belief creates arrogance. Certainty creates gratitude. Gratitude creates humility. That's true. I like that. I like that a lot. Got to call it a night, but I enjoyed this. We'll finish watching tomorrow. Peace, Ethan. The absence of good is neutral. Fundamentally, yes, but the absence of good in creation is going to be evil because entropy is emergent within creation. It's kind of an intrinsic thing, but it's not fundamental to existence, but it is fundamental to creation. I've had about the same level of reality manifestation manipulation as you. Tyler, maybe a little more. It's very intriguing. Yeah, it is. You can really impact yourself and things around you, but you are also constrained by God and his thoughts and his goals, which you perceive as physicality. So matter is what matters. Okay, that's all it is. Matter is what matters. It is the information that you cannot disregard because it forms a hard constraint that you have to contend with. You can't just wish it away. Usually, sometimes you can manifest, rashes on yourself, and but that's a specific circumstance. Anyways, peace, guys. Hit the like button, like I said, and if you'd like to join our Discord discussions on Thursday, which is tomorrow at 7 p.m. Pacific, send me a private message on Instagram, and I will send you the link for that. So, thank you, everyone, and peace.